excited to talk about starting a podcast. And while, yes, I have my own podcast because you're listening to it, I think it makes sense to have you check out this episode because I'm going to be talking to two women who started a podcast called the Welloff Podcast. And we're going to dive into what it's all about and their experience and how that was weaved into creating this podcast. But I thought I would start with leveraging the fact that one of the hosts, Gina, who's here on the call, we knew each other because I was her Pilates instructor back in the day. And Gina and I found a mutual love for Salt and Peppa and Adina Howard, and we were always busting a move. Gina, I can never hear one of those songs without immediately thinking about you.
Oh yeah. I mean, that was great. So, I mean, I used to work at AOL and they hired Katie to come teach Pilates after work on like Wednesday afternoons. And it was amazing. And that was my first introduction to Pilates, and I'm addicted now. Thank you very much, Katie. But yeah, I didn't really know how to do it. So we're like doing like the squats against the wall, and I'm like dropping it like it's hot when Adina Howard comes on. So
you made that class so much fun, especially like because when you like, for me, I was working full time. I had this passion behind the scenes and into fitness and wellness and the whole nine. And I'm like, it was so cool to go to class and just like your energy. I remember just always being like, this just doesn't feel like I'm going to work.
And we started hanging out afterwards and became best friends. So,
and I love that my Facebook tries to remind me like 10 years ago, you did this. And it was like, Gina's like always in the photo, usually at the Liberty Hotel in Boston.
We partied it up.
But I think what's important about this story, you guys, is that so many of you who private coach with me sometimes will say like, but I don't know. I mean, I know them. So like, how am I going to charge for that? Or I know them, like how can I imagine going into business and doing this? And I always say like your relationships are the best person to talk to about starting a business, becoming a client, having them on as a guest, whatever the case may be, because you know each other so well and you can speak to each other's experience. And it's ultimately why I started following Welloff Podcast. It's why I ultimately started listening and was like, oh, wow, this is something that Gina's doing. I love Gina. I'm going to support it. Oh, wait, who is Dr. Tara? Like, let's go scope her out. And so it's really exciting to have you both on. And I think one of the first things I wanted to talk about was what was going on in each of your lives that you felt like kind of worked this interest of starting a podcast. Dr. Tara, I'll start with you.
Okay.
So at that time.
So I don't know. I feel like I have a lot to say. And when you hit a certain level of just life experience and professional experience, at least in my opinion, you need to share it. And I was researching into how to start up a podcast and decided it was too daunting. And then Gina, who I adore, and we had met through business, and she moved back to Connecticut, and I was boo-hooing because I thought I'd never see her again. This is a lesson in just synchronicity and manifestation. She reached out to me and said, I'm at iHeart. They want me to start a podcast and I want you to be the co-host. And I'm like, oh my God, like isn't that kismet? I was just thinking about it. But again, I think it's for me, like, I have a lot of life left to go, but I feel like I've learned a lot up to this point. And I want to share that with people. Like, what's the point if we're not going to help make the world a better place? So that's kind of what it is for me. And listen, we want more listeners. So everyone who's listening, please follow the Welloff Podcast and follow us on social media at the Welloff Podcast. But I always say to Gina, if one person hears us and they're better because of it, then it's a score. That's really the heart of it for me.
That is so well said. I feel like that's exactly why I started my podcast too. I'm like, I don't want anybody to have to go through the challenges that I faced and the ups and downs, and they were so dramatic, right? Mine started in relationship coaching, and relationship to self, but then evolved into starting a business and finding my purpose, right? And I think from your background in mental health and addiction, and as I went down the Instagram rabbit hole of stalking you, I was like, wow, we have a lot of similarities. So like, not only have I been affected by addiction and have had them myself as a result of growing up with addiction, but I think my whole like life journey now is to be able to give back, help people understand addictions, the compulsive behaviors that we take on because we want to feel good enough. And what I love about your podcast is you guys are really blending, okay, real life experiences, the ups and the downs, the mental health, the physical health of it all. And I love that your quote, like living a top shelf life, right? Like we always want to strive for better, but I think we all know with addiction, striving for perfection isn't where we're trying to go here, right? It's like
Right.
we're just trying to make progress. And if we can share our own experiences or other people come on the podcast and they share theirs and it improves one person's life or they have an aha moment, like that's huge. So I love that that's been your mission too. And I know Gina, Dr. Tar was saying that, you were work at iHeart and they had asked you to do a podcast. Walk me through that. Like what was going on? You've got this job and then they're like, can you do a podcast? I mean, you have the personality for a podcast, so I can see why, but like what was going on behind the scenes? And then how did you two come up with, okay, this is the content that we really want to dive into, that this is really important to both of us?
So first of all, let me just say, like, iHeart did not come to me and say, hey, we think you should be do
Oh,
a
okay.
podcast. So no, that wasn't the case. So
100%.
yeah, that would have been really cool. And then I'd be like, well, you have to pay me for that. But at my old job, I used to work for an agency, an advertising agency in New Jersey, which is how I met Tara.
Okay.
I started a podcast in 2020 when the pandemic was happening. I couldn't go to networking events. I'm in sales. So my CEO at the time was like, let's do a podcast because this is going to be a way to generate leads and to get you in the door. So I started a podcast called The Conversation with an HER, and it was about successful women in business. So I was reaching out to CMOs, CEOs, people, and like entrepreneurs, and having them on the podcast is kind of like a foot in the door. So it was a lead generator.
Genius. Let's talk about this. Genius.
Yeah. So it was a lead generator for business. So Dr. Tara was one of the people I reached out to because she had recently become the CEO of Preferred Behavioral Health Group in New Jersey. And so I reached out to her and I said, you have a lot, I've been stalking you and I want you on the podcast. Also, can you do some marketing with us? So it was kind of, talking about that and getting them on the show and then talking about marketing and business, their business success. And then asking, well, what are you doing for marketing? Is there any way that I could help or we could collaborate and that, and networking. So that she came on my podcast and we had an incredible synergy and she was just very well spoken and very knowledgeable on all fronts. So when I left that job, because I moved to Connecticut, I started working for iHeart, and one of the things that they really liked was that I ran this podcast as a lead generator. So they were like, we want you to keep this conversation podcast going, but I couldn't because it was with my old agency. So I started a new one and was thinking like, I don't want to do this by myself. It's more fun with someone else.
Yeah.
And the first person that came into my brain was Tara. And so I called her and she's just like, yes. How did you know I was thinking about this? So
you're like, because I was talking to you.
Yeah.
Me and Katie.
Yeah. And we had recently just hung out. So while I was still working for the agency, I invited her and some of her team to play golf. And again, we totally hit it off. And she's like, I want you to come to dinner with me and my husband. And I was like, that's wonderful, but I live in Connecticut now. Probably never going to happen. And sure as shit. Oh, sorry. Can I swear?
No, you can swear.
Okay.
Give the explicit title on these podcasts.
Yes. And now Paul and I are besties. So there's that.
So there's that. That's incredible. Either of you, what do you feel like based on the topics that you all have chosen? How did you choose the topics? Like, how have you chosen the guests? How did you choose the overall theme? Because it's really, I think, unique in the perspective that you're doing. And so I would love for you to share more. Maybe Tara, I'll start with you. What were some of the topics that were near and dear to your heart? And then Gina, I'll kick it to you with the same question.
Well, I mean, everything is really framed in a perspective of health and that being healthy is being wealthy. And I think that we have so many different guests, but in some way they align with who we are as well, because we've accomplished a lot. We don't do just one thing. We face challenges, so they're very different, but I think we can identify with them quite a bit. And I think that's kind of what we find intriguing. We find guests that have a story, but maybe not your typical like down and out and rose to the top kind of story, but just something that I think people can identify with and hopefully be inspired by, and one of the things that I hope that our listeners find on Well Off is that their dreams don't seem unattainable,
Yeah. Oh, well
or
said.
yeah, or that, if you have this idea, pursue it. What's the worst thing that can happen? And if things happen along the way, whether it's an illness or an addiction or some sort of trauma, that's not a deal breaker, that you still can persevere and find happiness, and that happiness comes in all forms. So I think that's really what we're looking for. And it sounds broad, but we
Yeah.
seem to find it in all
Yeah.
of our guests from all walks of life. And I know that we share the same sentiment, that there is not a guest that um, doesn't kind of just blow us away with their answer when we ask them, what does well off look like and what's your top shelf? Like it always gives me food for thought and
Mm.
perspective. And I always walk away feeling better because we met this person and spent 30 or 45 minutes with them. So I hope that answers. Like, I know that's kind
It
of like,
does.
you
No,
know,
well, I'm
a bit,
even
yeah.
I'm even thinking about like some of the podcasts that I've been on or the guests that I've had, right? They become lifelong friends and or connections in some way, shape, or form. I just went to an event in Boston. It was a women's conference. And I must have seen five other women who had been on the same podcast as I had been as a guest. And we
Yeah.
were all sitting together and we're chatting. And like, it was because this one podcast host had introduced us. And I feel like you said, like there's topics that you all that each topic is different and yet there's this common theme that's like woven in between. Gina, before I
Yeah.
kick it over to you, Tara, what are some of your favorite like topics that you've recently talked about on the podcast that are just kind of makes you like feel really good that you even have this podcast to share this?
Yeah, I mean, some of them haven't aired yet, but I think one of our most recent, and I love them all, so I have to make that disclaimer, but we had Phil Falcone on our podcast, and he's the producer of the Terrifier trilogy,
Hmm.
the horror movies, and they are now the highest grossing film of all time that's unrated.
Unrated. Yeah.
Unrated.
Whoa.
And
Okay.
he's precious. And I think that what I loved so much about him, and we have a mutual friend, and that's how we were able to get him on the podcast. But I loved his humility and how down to earth he was, and how much fun he was having. But I mean, this was just kind of like a dream. He's like, I want to make movies. And people were like, yeah, okay. And
Hmm.
he did it. He did it. And
Yeah.
I'm not a horror fan, which if you listen to
No,
this
me neither.
episode, you'll know, like, but and now I follow like all their social media, and Art the Clown is so scary, but I love everything, but I loved that. And I think, he talks so much about his head not getting too big, and he drives a Kia. And I love that. I love that because I think there's nothing more unattractive than having some affectation of fame, or thinking that you're better than. And, I come from nothing, and I've really created something, and I don't forget where I come from. And I treat everyone I meet like they're the CEO of a company. And I loved having him. He was adorable, and we had so much fun.
Oh, I
And it
love
was
that.
it was like our most listened, most downloaded, most liked social
Wow.
media
Yeah.
post episode. And like, that's not what we're going for. We're just going
Right.
for having the real great conversation. So I think if I think about just the last month or so, definitely my favorite.
That's awesome. Gina, what about you? Some favorite topics or things that just kind of hit home for you around the podcast?
I mean, there's so many, but recently we just did a big, breast cancer awareness for October, and I'm a breast cancer survivor. So obviously that's very near and dear to my heart. So we had on two women that are absolutely incredible. We
Mm.
had Kim Douglas, who is a TV personality. She was on the Ellen DeGeneres show as like the beauty consultant for 17 years. She
Oh,
went on Hallmark's Home and Family. She's just such a ray of light. And she is also a breast cancer survivor. So when she was going through her journey at the same time I was watching her on the Home and Family show because I was working from home and it came on right after the Golden Girls. So it was
I
just odd.
mean, I still have the card on my fridge that says, "Thank you for being a friend." You had sent all your friends
Yes.
after you got your diagnosis and you were cleared. You sent us all cards. I still have it on my fridge. It's traveled to me from every house. I'm like,
Oh, I had
every
these,
morning when I go into my fridge, I see you.
I love that. Tara, I had these
Oh,
cards made for everybody that helped support me through my breast cancer journey that had the Golden Girls on it.
that was great.
Yeah.
She had them made like they did not exist, which
Yeah.
is the
They
best
I
part.
exist now,
love it.
They
but then
exist
they did.
now.
Yeah. But so yeah, so Kim Douglas was awesome. And then also we had Elizabeth Cormier, who is kind of reinventing the wheel as far as early cancer detection. It's
Oh, cool.
Mammagen. You should really check out that episode if you haven't, especially if you're a woman. There's a lot of tips and advice for, getting your annual mammograms and what to look for and like BI-RADS category, a lot of things that women just don't know about.
Oh, yeah.
So it's very educational, and she's hopefully this time next year, there will be a blood test that you can just go and get and know if you have early stage breast cancer.
Holy shit. That's
Yeah.
Yeah.
incredible. You know what we'll do? We'll link that specific episode in the show notes so people can
Yeah.
listen to it. Because,
It's going to be a game changer.
well, I
It's
have
so
two,
powerful.
so powerful. I feel like I have two people right now who have called me, like within the last, I'm talking 7 days. One has breast cancer, the other is going to get tested for it. And it's like, I think that's what's so powerful about, like we said, taking our past experiences, sharing them in a platform where you can go internationally with this and have
Yeah.
really in-depth conversations and share your own experience and just not and knowledge with people so that they
You
don't go
should
through the
get
same
her
shit.
on. Yeah, you should get her on your podcast because she's incredible.
I would love to if you guys would be up for making an intro.
Sure,
Count
sure.
me in.
Those were actually tied for my favorite as well. And
Mm,
I think again, just what I shared about Phil Falcone, I feel like all of our guests have achieved such greatness in their own rights, but
mm.
there's that element of humility that, ego wasn't what they lead with on any count. And we have an amazing episode coming up with Bianca D'Alessio from HBO Max's Selling the Hamptons.
Oh, cool.
And yeah, and just I'm just blown away by how lovely and down to earth these people are.
Well, you make a really good point, which is I want to transition into this kind of final question of like, you talked about ego, right? And I think so many people, when they have a dream to start a podcast, write a book, start a company, whatever it may be, they often feel this imposter syndrome, right? Like, who am I based on my experience? And should I do, and let's say for examples of this, start a podcast? And I think what's so powerful about it that I've started to share with people is imposter syndrome is a great thing if you think about it. It means that there's like your intuition, the desire that you have that is in your heart is like there and it is loud and you're wanting to do this thing. And so you're on the right path. And it's important to be able to be like, everyone started at the beginning. No one was an expert. You don't have to come from it at a place of fake it till you make it or having all this confidence or ego. There's humility in not knowing, right? How to do it. So in that vein, you guys have been at this for a little bit. What do you feel like you know now that you wish you knew then when you first started the podcast? And I would love for you to answer the question as if you were a brand new podcaster. You're somebody who's like always wanted to start a podcast. Like, what advice, what experiences did you guys go through that now you're like, oh, yeah, that would have helped at the beginning?
I mean, how much time do you have?
Well,
I know.
we have another 10 minutes.
So I think that to keep it simple, and if someone is listening and they have a dream or an idea for a podcast, to just do it. Because even though it's daunting, I mean, we've learned as we've gone along, like what works, what doesn't work, how to do it. And what I love is that, the handful of people in my life that I know that are regularly listening will say, I can really notice in season 2 that you guys have found your groove.
Oh, yeah.
And we have, we have a great chemistry. We have great timing. we kind of know how we operate, like who is going to ask what.
Hmm.
And I love that people notice that. So I think that um, that was like oops, I'm like in the sun here. Like a big learning lesson, like just go with it. Like eventually you'll find your groove, you'll find your flow, you'll find out what works, like what days of the week are better, like whatever, like
Right.
just figure it out as you go along. Like I always say, just roll out the carpet as you're walking. Like it's okay. You don't
Hmm.
have to have the whole plan. You don't have to see the whole thing before you. Like just start. You have to start.
Mm. Well said. Gina, what are your thoughts on that?
So I definitely agree with everything that Tara said, but additionally, you need time. You need free time. And when I say free time, you can do a 9 to 5, but like after work, you need to have time to work at night and on weekends, because it's a lot of work, especially if
Mhm.
you're doing it by yourself. So if you're doing it by yourself with no money, no funding, as Tara and I did, you're doing all the editing, you're doing all the social, you're doing all the creating content and all of that. And it's a lot of work. So just be prepared to know, like, yes, absolutely go do it, but just make sure you have the time to do it, because you'll get very easily overwhelmed if you don't. But start slow, learn what's the best program to use for editing, what's the best program to use for recording, kind of going through those things. And then you have to develop a social plan. You have to be a marketer. You have to enlist in a marketer. And, I have a strong marketing background, and we enlisted in some marketing help from somebody that's even more powerful, to help us with a website, to help us with strategy and marketing in that aspect with social. And then we had to get help. We got some interns that just need experience out of college to help us with,
So smart.
creating content. And we just put it out on LinkedIn, and we say at the top, like, this is an unpaid position. And I mean, we get like 50 applicants
Holy
because
shit.
Yeah.
people are looking for experience to work with. And, our interns, they're rotating, kind of thing, but they've all gotten jobs based on the experience that they've had with us. So
That's really incredible. What a great way to give back. I feel like I just recently had a client who was wanting to get an intern, and so we went through that process, and I thought to myself, I was like, why have I not done this? I've done job shadowing, like meeting with my old like alma mater of like, said, oh, come join me for a day and we can job shadow. And then recently I was like, why am I doing all this work myself when I can just do
yeah.
something else? It's like, because you're right, they're craving that experience. And I think being able to learn from the ground up, and to your point, in both of your points, just get started. I mean, I remember going to YouTube. I remember just asking around to other people who I knew had a podcast, what's the best mic to use. And then I've sort of advanced as I've gone. I'm like, oh, I don't love that system anymore. I really hear that this one's great. And just making those edits as we go. So I think what I'll do too, you're reminding me, I made myself a cheat sheet so that when I like was making my podcast, I knew exactly what to do every time. So you guys, I'll just link that. It's like a Google Doc, so no big
Oh
deal.
yeah, that would be great.
But that might be really helpful for someone. But I love this, and I really admire what you're both doing, and really not only like in a way, it really is giving back to the community. Like it fills
Mhm.
your heart because it's purposeful and you're passionate about it, but it's not because you're trying to fill your cup up. It's you're filling other people's cups up. Not only
Yeah.
those who listen, those who are advertising on your podcast as well, but also the interns and the people who are learning from you.
Yes, we love them. We right
Yes.
now have three young ladies and they're phenomenal, their energy, their talent, and but I mean, I feel like they're giving us so much of themselves, but also what they're gaining is so invaluable. And I mean, it looks really impressive on a resume
Oh yeah.
to be part of a production team of a podcast. So I mean, it's definitely a two-way street, but they're really, really impressive. And we're looking to grow our team. So we just posted this week for
Yeah. A video
a
editor.
video editor. So if
Very cool.
anybody's
And
listening,
does it have to
And
be
we,
does it have to be remote, or does it need to be, or can it
no,
be remote?
remote
Is it?
can,
remote.
yeah, totally
Okay.
remote. They could do it from wherever. And I didn't even get a chance to tell Tara this, but I had a call with one of our interns yesterday because she has an interview coming up and just wanted some advice, in the marketing field on, do's and don'ts for interviews. So, I spent a half hour on the phone with her, just kind of going through, and we've done that for our past interns as well. So it's just kind of like a little mentorship as well. So they're really getting a lot back, but they're helping us tremendously.
Can you two imagine if we had this kind of support growing up?
I know. I say
Imagine.
that all the time. But see, but I didn't. So that's
Yeah.
I'm not the type that I'm just going to keep it all for myself. I want to give it away. I want to do for others what wasn't done for me.
I wholeheartedly agree with you. For those of you who are listening, check out the Welloff Podcast. I'm going to link the podcast episode that Gina mentioned in there so you can go directly and then you can binge all their other podcasts, which will be great. I'll also include their social media handles and whatnot. But ladies, before we wrap, any kind of final thoughts for someone who is listening who is either A, trying to start a podcast, or B, is trying to have a top shelf life? What kind of final thoughts would you give them as we wrap up this episode? Gina, I will start with you and then I'll go to Tara.
So I have learned over the past, I'd say 3 years, that to live your top shelf life and to really be what well off means to you. You know, when we started this, we kind of really wanted to be with the mental health, the physical health, and the successful business, but really living your best life. I wasn't living my best life and I was not happy. So once I was able to kind of break free from that and live my best life, just to know that like anything is possible and you can change on a dime, you can change your trajectory whenever you want. And a lot of our guests have proven that, for instance, at one of our recent ones, with the addiction episode, rock bottom, contemplating suicide, and then turn their life around and now is coaching and helping people. So just know that if you are struggling or if you're not happy with where you are, you can change it.
Absolutely. Well said. I was going the
love that,
same the
Gina.
whole time you're talking. I'm like, I've been there. I know what that is.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi. Raise my hand. Tara, what about you?
So I have two thoughts. The first is, and if you listen, and Gina knows this to our podcast, that I'm very spiritual. I'm very much a fan of vision boards and manifesting. And I think it's because the science part of my brain knows that it's in our consciousness, right? And we dream in pictures. So if you can envision it, it's already on your radar. It's on your frequency. We don't dream about things or vision things, have a vision for things for us if they're not for us.
Ooh,
So
That's a good one.
Say that again.
That we do not dream about things or have a vision of them unless they are for us.
Oof.
So if you and I've read so much and about people that, let's say they dreamed of a house and then all of a sudden they end up in a house that just looks just like it, or they dreamed of this beach scene and then they're on vacation and they see it. Like there's something cosmically that I don't know how to name. So I just say if it's here on your brain, it's already for you. So take some action steps towards it. But the other piece about a top shelf life, the only way you can attain it is if it's your top shelf life. You can't look on social media or look at your neighbor and want what they have. You have to be authentic and true to yourself. And I think that's one of the things that we try to impress upon people on the Welloff podcast. When we ask that, the answers are vastly different. So that means that my top shelf is not yours. You have to be true to yourself and authentic and really decide what makes you happy and feel fulfilled. Because, just like when I go on vacation, I want to do nothing. I want to lay down with a cocktail.
I don't want
in
to hike.
the sunshine. I don't want to hike.
I want to flip.
I don't want to map. I don't want to work. But some people are like, I want to walk the Appalachian Trail. And I'm like, God bless. That's not but see, that's the difference. Like we have to do what feels right for us.
That is so well said. And I think you both kind of touched upon this too, of that sometimes the thing that you're going through right now, the thing that feels hard, the thing that feels difficult to go through and manage, we don't really understand why it's happening for us or to us. And in the same breath, we then can also, like you said, dream in pictures of, oh, I'd really love for this to happen. And our fears, doubts, our insecurities can often get in the way. But I often have been using this phrase over the last week, and so hopefully it will resonate with those that are listening, is that sometimes instead of the calm before the storm, there's like the shit show before the calm, right? And that's when you know, when everything's sort of up in the air, like Wizard of Oz style, that, oh my gosh, some really great things are going to change. And I really love the example that you both gave. And I feel very blessed and honored to have you both on here, and how much we all share that similar vision of like life hasn't necessarily been easy. And we had a vision for ourselves. And it's very easy for other people to do it too, but they don't have to do it alone, right? Like they can
That's
go
right.
get support, they can reach out to us, whatever that may be, listen to an episode, etc. So we'll be sure to link everything so people can get in touch with you both. And thank you so much for being on the podcast. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks so much for having
Pleasure.
us.
Thank you, Katie.
All right, you guys, in health and happiness. We'll see you in the
You
next
too.
episode.